Actually, strangely enough, I'd say, especially for children, because it's important to start from early age, but Horrible Histories,
Okay.
because that book was, I read it when I was like 10 or 9, and it really showed me how much like racism had affected many people in the past, and just the extent of which um, they were exploited, and just how wrong it is really. And I think if you get children to realize that from an early age, it cuts out a lot of problems.
I'm going to stick with three. I think in terms of fiction, Andrea Levy, Small Island, is a wonderful book about the Windrush experience. And I'd encourage anyone who hasn't read it to read it. I can lend you a copy. I have like a spare copy here. I think there are some brilliant podcasts. If you know, books aren't your thing, about race. Renee Edo-Lodge has done a really good podcast. And I think I don't think you should be put off listening to some of this stuff. You know, you can always turn it off if it's not your thing, but I think you'd be surprised at how inclusive a lot of the discussion about this isn't just people sort of, you know, having a moan or shaking a fist. These are really educative sort of items. David Olusoga, who's a Black historian, a professor at Manchester University, has done a lot of writing, in particular Black and British, A Forgotten History, I think is a really, really important book, and some of his series are available on BBC iPlayer. iPlayer actually has a whole chapter dedicated sort of Black history and Black resources right now. And I think also Akala's book, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire, I personally found amazing for talking about the sort of experience of the BAME community in terms of colonisation, in terms of coming to the UK. So I really, really encourage anyone to read that.
There's an amazing film that's on Netflix at the moment by James Baldwin. Well, it's by Rory Peck, but it's about James Baldwin and James Baldwin's writing. It's based on one of his books called I Am Not Your Negro. It's a really fascinating and very moving film. It's a documentary film. I would say, what's another one? Oh yeah, Frantz Fanon is a really interesting person to read. He was a psychiatrist from Martinique in the 1940s, and he wrote a lot about the idea of racism, but also internalized racism. And there's also a film by here, well, there's a film based on a book of his called Concerning Violence, which talks about the issue of violence in liberating, in the colonized countries needing to liberate themselves, and the need for violence, which is quite a controversial topic, but he focuses on the violence that has been inflicted in those countries, and asks the question of is the only way, because it's very difficult to ask for freedom and for freedom to be granted, and most of these countries have gained freedom through a violent struggle, and creating a situation where freedom has to be taken back. So it's that question of you know, whether power can be shared, really. And so it's a really interesting book. But and then also Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she's a novelist. She's has done a TED talk, and it talks about, it's called The Danger of the Single Story. And it's about being able to have many narratives about ourselves, and the importance of being able to listen to each other's stories. So those are three that I can think of off the top of my head. Oh, there's a really good book, again, The Souls of Black Folk by W.E. Du Bois. It was written in 1903, and it's astonishing when you read it, because it feels like there are passages in it that could be written about, we could be talking about George Floyd. Not very much has changed in that period, and it's shocking when you go back and you look at the texts and the way he's writing and the passion with which he writes. It sounds like some of the newspaper articles that we're reading today about what's happening right now.
Yeah.
So it's sobering.
Black history started well before, and speaking from a Black person point of view, started well before slavery. I'm sure there's a history that went as far back as Roman times, and if not before, which hasn't been talked about. And it'll be good to do a bit of research just to understand a little bit more. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of material out there, but friends of mine who are so-called woke, so to speak, they would forever tell me that there were, beyond the Ashanti tribes, you had the tribesmen of Benin and Zulus and things of that nature. So there's a lot of history out there. But in contemporary times, in the last few hundred years, these are the two books which I'd say are particularly useful to read. And
could you just tell as you hold them up, just give their titles out, Howard?
Yeah, so this is called Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire by Alaka. And this one is British by Afra Hersher. And she was actually on TV, partly narrating a program with Samuel L. Jackson on Sunday evening, BBC Two. And both of these sort of, it empowers, I'd say, people of colour to understand that we contributed to the British Empire. And also it helps us understand how the British Empire benefited from people of colour.
Oddly enough, a film called The Black Panther by Marvel, I thought that was amazing, because even though it dealt with fantasy, but it was grounded in reality. It shows that not just people of color, but the perception that where you come from where someone comes from impacts their contribution. It was dispelled in that film. Amazing film. Another book that I would recommend is To Kill a Mockingbird. I thought that was one of the most powerful books that I've ever read. And I'll look for the Wilbur Smith, but there are a couple of Wilbur Smith books that deal wonderfully with racism. I think A Sparrow Falls or When the Lion Feeds. Those are very good books.
Obviously, movies, there's like 12 Years a Slave. I actually watched it the other day. I think I managed to catch like the end of the middle near the ending part. So obviously, that's something for people to actually learn about slavery and what Black people actually went through. I think the story was about a Black man who was kidnapped. He wasn't a slave originally. He was like a free Black man. And then I think he got kidnapped. And then he was actually forced to become a slave. And he actually endured 12 years of like torture. And then he was found and rescued or something along those lines, really. And I think there's also another film which I would actually recommend, which is like typical me, because me being like a Marvel fan, superhero fan, etc., probably would be like Black Panther. Because obviously at the time, I wouldn't say it was like the first Marvel movie to have a Black lead, because obviously you had Blade, but I think Black Panther was like the first like movie with obviously like a predominantly Black cast, but it wasn't necessarily a superhero movie. I mean, watching it a few times, I know it's meant to be like a superhero movie, but sometimes doesn't feel like a superhero movie, but in a good way. It actually shows pretty much what Africa could have been like if the whole continent wasn't colonized. And Wakanda is meant to be like a fictional country in Africa that was never taken over, was never invaded, was never colonized. It just hid in plain sight. And obviously, yeah, actually like shows like people, whenever you think of Africa, people always think Africa is like poor, it's a third world country, blah, blah, blah. Whereas Black Panther actually showed what Africa, the whole of Africa could have been like if it wasn't like colonized. I mean, it probably could have been like a technological marvel at some point, but obviously because of the sins that happened of the past and the way people think about Africa isn't really good. And also because of also the guy that played Black Panther, Chadwick Boseman, obviously his passing had a massive effect on everyone, not just like Black people, but it actually showed that doesn't matter like what your background is, you should actually be proud of like your heritage. So yeah, obviously I always like tell people about my heritage, which I'm really proud of. I've got my dad who's Nigerian and my mum's Jamaican, but I was born in England and I grew up in Clapham. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting heritage which I'm actually proud of. And it actually shows that it doesn't matter like who you are, where you're from, you should always like be proud of your heritage. I mean, yeah, you may have been born in Britain, but don't forget about your roots sort of thing.
I think a really good book for like teenagers and like young adults is The Hate You Give. It's also a movie, and it really does like show the fact like racism in America and how like kind of like more ghetto areas and how they're not actually like as horrible and as dangerous as they seem, and like how some people can't actually get out of that situation. And it's like a good book to read, like it's like very gripping, but it also has like a really good storyline, and it's always keeping in like the idea of that racism isn't okay.
I Can by Nas. The video is excellent. The message is amazing because he's speaking directly to children. And there's so many songs. Nearly all songs by Bob Marley. Exodus is a good one by Bob Marley. Natural Mystic, and a song called Guiltiness by Bob Marley.
Kit and I have sort of in the past, we've sort of read books together, as Kit's been kind of helping me with my faith and my journey, which has been inspiring for me, and I'm hugely appreciative. But when the whole Black Lives Matter, protest started and people were taking the knee and all that good stuff, I expressed to Kit, I was just a little unclear in my own mind about, this whole agenda, and I was a bit uncomfortable with some things I saw. It felt too political, and it felt it was going in the wrong direction. So Kit said, why don't you read a book, which he'd actually found very helpful, and it's called We Need to Talk About Race by Ben Lindsay. And so I have read it, and it is fantastic. It's very easy to read. It's very provocative. It's quite shocking in places. Feels very authentic. Doesn't in any way feel to me it's been written with a kind of, with an activist agenda. It is activist in the sense that, that Ben wants us to think about this and to have our churches think about, this agenda, to become more knowledgeable and to figure out what it can do, that it wants to do to right the wrongs, to make, all our churches, a place that we'd all be proud to be part of, and to kind of, take God out into our community in the way we'd want to. So I think it's a really great read. It's very, I find it, for me, it was invaluable. And it's actually triggered a turning point in my thinking. And I want to now think more deeply about what I can do to make a difference. And also adjust some of the things I do inadvertently, which I now think are inappropriate.
So one of the most harrowing things I watched was, is it called When They See Us on Netflix? I don't know if you've seen it. It's about the Central Park Five boys. So there are these boys in New York in the 80s who were accused of raping a white woman in Central Park. They were thrown in jail and everything. Donald Trump, at the time, he bought like a newspaper article and put in an ad like these boys should get the death penalty. And then basically it came out like way later that they didn't do it, and there was DNA to put it onto someone else. But that was all about like racist cops and just the way of getting or going through the system. That's a really harrowing watch, but very good.
Well, I thought we'd been watching the program about Anthony Bryan sitting in limbo on BBC Drama, and that's worth watching. It's around the same time they were putting out the Back in Time in Brixton, a very good book about the understanding the black experience in white majority churches by Ben Lindsay. That's a very good book. I've enjoyed that, learnt from it. I'm currently reading Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and that starts to involve all sorts of things, including white privilege and assumptions that we make. And that's very challenging, very well written, good to operate from. As I said, Leroy Logan is this is a very interesting book about his life as a policeman and faith and all sorts in between. And I made an interesting discovery on my Kindle, or just something I read about, and it's of a young lady called Phyllis Wheatley in sort of 1700 or something, and she wrote poems on various subjects, religious and moral, and she was one of the first people to be published in this country, and I thought it would be an exciting read, but she is very much writing in 18th century English, beautifully modulated, but an interesting person. Keep the Faith, Baby by Wilfred Wood, anything by John Sentamu, Archbishop Tutu, it goes on.
There is book, Martin Luther King. I have that you can get the books of them. That is the Jamaica eras, and that's Samuel Sharp. You have Queen Nancy of Maroon. You have Marcus Garvey. You have Paul Goebel and George William Gordon, and you have quite a few of them.
There's a film called 42, which is quite good, but it's based in America. But that's a good film around like the first black baseball player in America.